Red Bull is not going to Austria just to test an upgrade. They're going there to answer a question Max Verstappen cannot ignore anymore. Can this team still give him a car with enough margin? Or did Barcelona show that Max is now fighting without the safety net that once protected him? Because the public version is easy to understand. Verstappen started 5th in Barcelona, Red Bull missed the front row, Mercedes, Ferrari, and McLaren all looked dangerous. Then the calendar moved toward Austria, Red Bull territory, with another development push waiting. But that version is too clean. The real issue is not that Max was suddenly exposed. It is that Red Bull may have been exposed while Max was still doing what Max does, pulling performance from a car that no longer looks comfortable enough to protect him. That is the uncomfortable part. When Verstappen is 5th, the question is not only why Max was not higher, the sharper question is why Red Bull needed him to be perfect just to stay near the fight. Barcelona did not make Max look ordinary, it made the Red Bull margin look smaller, and that matters because Austria is next, not just another race, not just another upgrade weekend. Austria is where Red Bull has to show that it still understands where the car is going. A small step might not be enough because this is not only about finding lap time, it is about direction. It is about whether Verstappen can look at Red Bull and still believe the team has a path back toward control. Barcelona gave the warning, Austria has to give the answer. And if it does not, the next question will not stay technical for long. It will become much bigger than an upgrade. It will become about how long Max Verstappen can keep carrying a team that is supposed to carry him. That is why this moment feels different. For most teams, an upgrade is just development. A new floor, a revised wing, a setup direction, a few tenths if everything works. For Red Bull, this Austria upgrade carries more weight than that, because it arrives after a weekend where the timing screen did not tell the old Red Bull story. The old story was simple. Even if qualifying was not perfect, Verstappen still had enough underneath him to pull the race back. Red Bull had race pace, Red Bull had tire control, Red Bull had strategy confidence, Red Bull had margin. Barcelona made that safety net look less certain. Max started 5th, Isaac Hadjar was right behind in 6th. That detail matters because it made the Red Bull picture look more like a package ceiling than just one driver missing something. Ahead of them, the pressure was not coming from one direction. George Russell had the front, Lewis Hamilton had Ferrari in the fight, Lando Norris had McLaren in the picture. That is the kind of spread that changes the political meaning of a race weekend. When one rival is fast, Red Bull can target the problem. When Mercedes, Ferrari, and McLaren all appear close enough to matter, the problem becomes harder to isolate. That is when an upgrade stops being just an upgrade. It becomes evidence. Evidence that Red Bull knows why the margin disappeared. Evidence that the team is not only reacting to rivals, but correcting the car. Evidence that Verstappen is not being asked to cover the same weakness again and again, because Max can cover a bad balance for one stint, he can cover a difficult qualifying session, he can cover a weekend where the car is not perfect, but he cannot cover a failed direction forever. That is the line Red Bull cannot afford to cross. Austria is supposed to be a place where Red Bull feels strong. The Red Bull ring should give the team a natural sense of control. The fans, the branding, the history, the whole stage makes it feel like a home race. That is exactly why it could become uncomfortable. If the upgrade works, Red Bull can say Barcelona was pressure, not panic. A warning, not a collapse, a moment the team understood and answered. But if the upgrade is unclear, or if the gain is too small, then Austria does not calm the story, it sharpens it, because the lap time is only the surface. The real question is whether Red Bull is still giving Max a direction he can trust. And right now, that trust does not need a public statement to be tested. It can be tested by the car, it can be tested by the timing screen, it can be tested by whether Mercedes, Ferrari, and McLaren still look close enough to punish every small Red Bull mistake. This is not collapse, it is pressure becoming visible, and the pressure is not abstract. It is Max Verstappen looking at a weekend where 5th place is no longer just a small setback. It is Red Bull looking at Austria knowing the upgrade has to prove more than speed. It is every rival around them turning one weak weekend into a bigger question. Can Red Bull still build a car at Verstappen level? Or is Max now moving faster than the team around him? That is what Austria has to answer. The pattern Red Bull cannot ignore is not built from one lap, one corner, or one poor session. It is built from what Barcelona made visible. What fans saw was Verstappen starting 5th. What Red Bull had to see was more uncomfortable. Max was still the reference point, but the car around him no longer looked like it had the cushion to control the weekend. That is a different kind of pressure. When Verstappen is the strongest part of the project, Every weakness in the package becomes louder, not because Max is failing, because he is still good enough to show exactly where the car is not. Barcelona made that visible in 3 places, first with Max himself. Fans can look at 5th and say Red Bull just missed the front row. But inside a team like Red Bull, 5th is not just a number. It tells you how much work the driver is being asked to do before the race even starts. If Max has to over-deliver just to keep Red Bull close, that changes the whole meaning of the weekend. Because a championship-level driver can hide balance problems, he can hide a difficult window, he can make a car look sharper than it really is. But when that becomes the normal expectation, the driver is no longer just maximizing the package. He is protecting the team from the truth of it. That is where the pressure begins. Second, look at Red Bull itself. The team can say development is part of every season. That is true. Every team upgrades, every team searches for grip, every team tries to understand where the car is losing time. But Red Bull is not just any team in this story. This is the team Verstappen has trusted to give him a car with answers. Not always a perfect car, but a car with direction. A car that lets him attack a weekend, knowing there is still something underneath him. Barcelona challenged that feeling, because when the margin is there, a difficult Saturday does not feel fatal. Red Bull can lean on race pace, Red Bull can lean on tire control, Red Bull can wait for the race to come back to them, but when the margin disappears, every small weakness becomes public. A balance issue becomes a grid position becomes traffic becomes strategy pressure becomes a race where Max has to solve problems the car used to solve for him. That is why Austria matters so much, not because one upgrade can fix everything. That would be too simple. Austria matters because it can show whether Red Bull understands the cause. If the team finds a step, the story changes. Red Bull can say Barcelona was a warning that forced a response. If the team only finds a small patch, the story stays alive. Because Max may still fight, but he is still fighting with less room than before. And if the upgrade does not give a clear answer, then the question becomes sharper. Not whether Red Bull is finished, whether Red Bull still has a development path strong enough for Verstappen. Third, look at the rivals. This is the part that makes Barcelona more dangerous than a normal Red Bull setback. The pressure was not coming from one team. Mercedes was there, Ferrari was there, McLaren was there. That matters because Red Bull can manage one threat. One rival gives you a target. One rival gives you a comparison. One rival gives you a clear problem to solve. But when several teams are close enough to punish you, the weekend changes. Now, Red Bull cannot just ask why Mercedes was quick. They have to ask why Ferrari had enough. They have to ask why McLaren stayed in the picture. They have to ask why Max was not sitting above the pressure, but inside it. That is the difference between being chased and being surrounded. And it does not mean Red Bull has collapsed. That would be fake drama. It means Red Bull no longer looks protected. The old Red Bull advantage was not just speed. It was control. Control over pace, control over strategy, control over the race story. Control over the feeling that if Max was in the car, the weekend could still tilt back toward them. Barcelona did not erase that completely, but it made the control look thinner. And once that happens, Austria stops being a normal development weekend. It becomes a test of whether Red Bull is fixing the cause or only treating the symptom. That is the reframe. This is not mainly about Barcelona, it is about proof. The simple question is whether Red Bull can make the car faster, but the better question is whether Red Bull can still give Verstappen a direction he can trust. Those are not the same thing. A car can be a little faster and still not answer the real concern. A small gain can help a lap time, but it does not automatically restore control. It does not automatically bring back the old safety net. It does not automatically prove that the development path is strong enough. That is why this story has weight. Max does not need Red Bull to be perfect. He has never needed perfect. The best drivers do not ask for easy weekends. They ask for a car that gives them a real fight. But there is a difference between fighting with a weapon and fighting with a question mark. Right now, Red Bull has to prove which one it is giving him. Austria can help answer that. If the car responds clearly, Red Bull can change the tone. The conversation moves away from doubt and back toward recovery. Verstappen gets evidence that the team still knows where the performance is hiding. But if Austria only gives a vague step, the pressure does not disappear. It becomes more specific. Then the question is not why Red Bull is slower on one weekend. The question is why the team still cannot rebuild the margin around Max. That is the part casual fans can miss. This is not about Max needing everything handed to him. It is about the basic structure of a championship fight. When your rivals are close, you need margin. When several rivals are close, you need answers quickly. When your lead driver is still extracting everything, but the car is still not clearly ahead, the problem becomes political inside the team even before anyone says anything dramatic in public. Because performance creates politics. A driver does not need to threaten anything for the pressure to build. The timing screen can do that, the grid can do that. The comparison with teammates and rivals can do that. A race like Barcelona can do that. That is why the most important part of Austria may not be the final position. It may be the feeling. Does Max get out of that weekend believing Red Bull has found the road back? Or does he leave with the same question Barcelona created? Because once a driver starts waiting for proof, every upgrade becomes more than a part on the car. It becomes a message, and Red Bull needs that message to be clear. This is where the proof becomes simple. Austria does not have to decide the championship. It does have to show whether Red Bull still has a believable answer. There are 3 ways this weekend can speak for the team. The first is performance proof. If the upgrade works, Red Bull can change the entire tone around this story. Barcelona becomes a warning that forced a response. Verstappen gets something real to work with, not hope. Not a promise, not another explanation from the garage, a car that gives him a clearer platform. That matters because Max does not need Red Bull to dominate every session. He needs enough margin to fight without being asked to rescue the weekend every time Mercedes, Ferrari, or McLaren gets close. If Austria gives him that even partly, Red Bull can breathe again. Not because every problem is solved, because the direction would look alive. The second is pressure proof. This is the more complicated outcome. What if the upgrade helps, but only a little? What if the car is better, but not enough to change the feeling? That is where the story becomes more dangerous for Red Bull, because a small step can improve lap time without restoring trust. Max can still fight with that. He is Max Verstappen. He can take a difficult car and make it look sharper than it feels. He can turn a narrow setup window into a result. He can cover problems other drivers would expose immediately, but that is not the same as Red Bull giving him control. And that difference matters, because when the car only improves slightly, the burden stays in the same place. It stays on Max, it stays on execution. It stays on perfect laps, perfect calls, perfect damage limitation. That is not how Red Bull used to feel. The old Red Bull gave Verstappen room to miss a little and still recover, room to absorb pressure, room to let the race come back toward him. Barcelona made that room look smaller. Austria has to show whether Red Bull can rebuild it. The third is future proof, and this is where the line has to be drawn carefully. If the upgrade does not work, that does not prove Verstappen is leaving. It does not prove Red Bull is finished. It does not turn one race weekend into a fake transfer story. But it does make the next question harder to avoid, because the future pressure around Max does not need a dramatic quote to become real. It can come from repeated evidence. A grid position can create it. A timing screen can create it. A rival comparison can create it. A race where Mercedes, Ferrari, and McLaren all look close enough to punish Red Bull can create it. That is how pressure builds in Formula One. Not always through public conflict, sometimes through pattern. And the pattern Red Bull has to avoid is clear. Max still looks like the strongest part of the project. The car cannot keep looking like the uncertain part. That is the hidden danger. Because when your driver is still operating at championship level, but the package around him no longer gives championship level margin, the team does not just lose pace, it loses authority, it loses the ability to control the story, it loses the feeling that every problem has an answer waiting inside the factory. That is why Austria matters, not because one upgrade decides everything, because one upgrade can reveal whether Red Bull is still moving in the right direction. If the car responds, the team gets a chance to turn the page. If the car only gives a vague answer, the doubt stays alive. If the car does not respond at all, then Barcelona stops looking like an isolated warning. It starts looking like part of a larger question: how long can Verstappen keep carrying the difference? That question is uncomfortable because it does not accuse anyone. It does not need scandal. It does not need fake panic. It simply asks whether Red Bull can still match the level of the driver it built its entire project around. And Max may not need to say much. The car can make the point for him. The lap time can make the point. The gap to Mercedes can make the point. The pressure from Ferrari can make the point. The presence of McLaren in the same fight can make the point. Austria will not answer every question about Red Bull, but it can answer one that matters more than the headline. Does Verstappen leave that weekend with proof that Red Bull still knows where the performance is? Or does he leave with the same doubt Barcelona created? That is the real tension. Because Red Bull is not only racing the field now, it is racing the belief of the driver who has carried its standard higher than anyone. Austria may not decide the championship, but it could decide something more uncomfortable for Red Bull. Whether Max Verstappen still believes this team can keep up with him